Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me for this talk on tracing your Presbyterian ancestors in Ireland. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to be looking at a range of different resources that you can use to find out more about your Presbyterian roots on this island. I'm going to be looking at some of the places where you can carry out research, some of the archives and libraries that have important collections of Presbyterian records. I'm going to be looking at the range of records themselves to find out what is available, what different types of documentation are available for you in carrying out your research. And I'm going to be looking at some of the books and other publications that can aid you in your research and provide some clues and tips as to how you can make the most of your research into your Presbyterian ancestors. Now, to begin with, I'm sure you'll be aware that there's not one single Presbyterian church in Ireland. If you've even studied Presbyterianism in Ireland in a very slight way, you'll realize that there are different shades of Presbyterianism on this island. There are various different Presbyterian denominations. Well, Presbyterianism in Ireland can be traced back over 400 years. And it really took root in the course of the 17th century with the establishment of Presbyterian congregations, the appointment of ministers in those congregations, and the creation of structures of Presbyterian government. There have been Presbyterian ministers in Ireland since the early 17th century. In fact, even before, some of the first Presbyterians in Ireland were in fact English Presbyterians who arrived here in the late 16th century. But as I've said, in the course of the 17th century, we see really the Presbyterian Church really becoming established on this island. In 1642, a presbytery was established in Carrickfergus, and that's considered to be the inaugural ruling body of Presbyterians on this island. The body from which, in a very real sense, the different historic denominations of Presbyterianism can trace their origins. In the course of the 17th century, the Presbyterian Church established presbyteries across, particularly in the northern part of Ireland, but across other parts of Ireland also. A Synod of Ulster was established, and that was the principal ruling body of Presbyterianism in Ireland until the creation of the General Assembly in 1840. Now, other historic Presbyterian denominations include the non-subscribing Presbyterian Church, the origins of which go back to the early 18th century, and the first serious split within Irish Presbyterianism, which was over the issue of subscription to the Westminster Confession of Faith. And as a result of that split, a body known as the Presbytery of Antrim was created. Other non-subscribing bodies include the Synod of Munster, the Remonstrant Synod, which was established following another major split in Presbyterianism in the 1820s. It was founded in 1830. And today we have the non-subscribing Presbyterian Church. A Presbyterian denomination that no longer exists today is the Secession Church, or the adherents of which are known as Seceders. The origins of it go back to a split within the Church of Scotland in the early 18th century over the issue of patronage. Over the course of the 18th century, Seceder congregations were established in many places, particularly in the northern parts of Ireland, and various Seceder bodies were created, leading to the creation of the likes of the Seceder synods. Now, in 1840, the great majority of Seceder congregations united with the main body of Presbyterians to form the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. However, some congregations stayed outside that union. Some Seceder congregations stayed outside that union and were affiliated to different Presbyterian bodies and maintained strong links with like-minded Presbyterians in Scotland. And the final historic Presbyterian denomination I want to mention this time is the Reformed Presbyterian Church, whose members are known as Covenanters. And they take their name from the Scottish Covenants of 1638 and then the Solemn League and Covenant of 1643. The first ordained minister in the Reformed Presbyterian Church was the Reverend William Martin, ordained in 1757. Reformed Presbytery in Ireland was established in 1763, and then in 1811 the Reformed Presbyterian Synod was established, and that is still the ruling body within the Reformed Presbyterian Church in Ireland. And there have been various other Presbyterian denominations as well, but those would be the principal historic Presbyterian denominations, and which would today's Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland was really created by representatives of the Presbyterian Church, the non-subscribing Presbyterian Church, and the Reformed Presbyterian Church back at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, Presbyterians have been writing their history in Ireland since the 17th century. Almost from their first appearance on this island, they've been telling their story in various ways. An important document dating from the latter part of the 1600s is the History of Presbyterianism, prepared by the Reverend Patrick Adair. Now, Adair was a Presbyterian minister at Cairncastle in County Antrim and then at Belfast, and he was tasked with writing the story of the rise of the Presbyterian government or Presbyterian Church in Ireland. The manuscript is held by the Presbyterian Historical Society. It's been published a number of times, most recently in an edition edited by Robert Armstrong and other academics. And it's a very important document in exploring the roots and early development of Presbyterianism on this island. Books, other books you might find very useful on Irish Presbyterianism. James Seton Reid was a very distinguished Presbyterian historian and minister of the the first half of the 19th century, and he produced 3 volumes of a book on the history of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. Finlay Holmes was a very distinguished historian of Presbyterianism in the latter part of the 20th century and the early 21st century. And his books are Irish Presbyterian Heritage, 1985, and the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, A Popular History, 2000, are very accessible, yet scholarly volumes and well worth checking out. And a beautifully produced book on Presbyterianism in Ireland is Lawrence Kirkpatrick's Presbyterians in Ireland. It includes a narrative history, a very accessible narrative history of Presbyterians on this island, and has brief sketches of every Presbyterian congregation on this island, along with a photograph of the meeting house. So these books and many others will be very helpful to you in finding out more, or really, you might say, getting to grips with the story of Presbyterianism on this island. A hugely helpful volume in terms of, you might say, providing a synopsis of every congregation in Ireland, Presbyterian congregation in Ireland, is the History of Congregations in the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. First published in 1982 by the Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland, and which, in a few paragraphs, outlines the history of every congregation. It particularly looks at the succession of ministers, but also provides details of when the congregation was founded, of when maybe the meeting house was built or rebuilt, and maybe some other pertinent details about that congregation. It's very useful in the sense that it can help you find out, well, when was the congregation founded? When was the congregation your ancestors belonged to founded? And if the congregation wasn't founded, for example, until, say, 1850, well, then you know that before 1850 you have to look elsewhere for your ancestors, because clearly the congregation they belonged to did not exist at that time. The text of the History of Congregation has been digitized by the Presbyterian Historical Society, and it's available for members on the website of the Presbyterian Historical Society. I'll be coming back to the website of the Society in due course. Now, Presbyterians have been very fond of writing the story of their congregations. For over 2 centuries now, Presbyterian congregations have been produced. Andrew Holmes, who's an academic at Queen's University, has written extensively about Presbyterians, has noted that there is a seemingly unique obsession of Ulster Presbyterians of writing and reading congregational histories. And certainly I would urge you, if you are researching your Presbyterian ancestors, check out if there is a Presbyterian, or rather a history of the congregation or congregations that you're interested in. Usually these books have been written by a member of the congregation, someone who knows the congregation and its families inside out, someone who has the benefit of local knowledge, of local people, of local place names, and for whom it is generally a labour of love in which they have gathered a huge amount of information and presented it in a format that is hopefully going to be useful to the reader. Look out, for instance, for the appendices to books, to these histories, maybe listing members, particular dates, maybe the transcribed documents, maybe their financial records and so on. So check out if there is a Presbyterian congregational history for the place that you're interested in. Now, there are very good collections of congregational histories in the likes of the Presbyterian Historical Society, or the Ulster Historical Foundation Library, or the North of Ireland Family History Library, the Linen Hall Library, also in the public library system. So check out if there's a congregational history. And just to show you the value of the information that can be found in a congregational history, this is Orr and Hazlitt's History of Ballyalbany Presbyterian Church, which is in County Monaghan, published in 1940. So first of all, we've got, to look at some of the lists of names in this book. Subscribers to a call to the Reverend Thomas Clark. I'll be mentioning calls in due course, but it's the Reverend Thomas Clark, very famous Seceder clergyman of the mid-18th century, led a large section of his congregation to America in 1764. There are also subscribers to the fund for rebuilding the meeting house in 1787, seat holders in the church in 1804, stipend payers 1866, subscribers to the Manse Fund 1873-4, and then a most unusual document, signatories to memorial opposing the wearing of a gown by the minister about 1873. And to find out more about that strange episode, you'll have to browse the book itself, but it is certainly an extremely interesting, and I think maybe a unique instance. Certainly to have a list of names opposing the wearing of a gown is certainly, I think, unique in terms of Presbyterian documentation. So again, just to emphasize, check out if there is a Presbyterian congregational history. You never know what you might find in it. Now, looking at the range of congregational records, well, you'll be aware of the likes of registers of baptisms and marriages, burials and deaths. Not so many of those, it must be said. Presbyterian congregational records frequently do not include registers of burials or deaths. Certainly not from, say, the 17th or 18th, 19th century. If they do exist, they tend to date from the late 19th and 20th centuries. That may be for the very simple reason that there is no burial ground attached to the Presbyterian Church. The congregation, members of the congregation go elsewhere to bury deceased family members. Now, you've got minutes of meetings. The session meeting, that's the meeting of the ruling elders and the minister. Committee meetings, various committees, could be the general committee, or it could be a committee set up to deal with a particular purpose, maybe a building committee, for instance. You might get communicants lists of those who are in communicant membership of the congregation, those who are allowed to come forward for the celebration of communion. You might have visiting books. These would be kept by ministers as they go around the congregation visiting members. The pastoral visitation of the congregation by the minister. You might even get a census, an actual census recording the names of everyone belonging to the congregation at a particular time. Transfer certificates, I'll come back to that in a moment. Calls to ministers. Mentioned already the call to the Reverend Thomas Clark. Well, a call to a minister was, you might say, the way in which a Presbyterian congregation acquired a minister. So when the congregation decided on who was the individual they would like to be their minister, they drew up a document. They set out the reasons why they wanted this individual to come to them to be their minister, and then it was signed by the members and adherents of the congregation. So you might get a lengthy list of the people associated with the congregation in the call to a minister. Financial records, of course, can be extremely important. There may be accounts, or maybe stipend lists, a stipend being the minister's salary. You can also get such things as records relating to seating arrangements. And that was something that did take up quite a bit of time in some Presbyterian congregations, regulating the seating arrangements, who was to sit where, dealing with occasionally disputes within congregations if someone was not happy with where they were seated. Also, setting the fees for actually having the right to sit in a particular part of the church. So all of these generate documentation and can be useful to you in your research. There may be title deeds. And then there may be other title deeds, I should say, but would be, say, title deeds for the actual site of the meeting house. It could have lists of names of the trustees, for instance, of the ground in which the church or meeting house stands, or maybe the title deeds for the manse, for instance. And you can get other congregational records, various associations, recreational, temperance associations, associations focused on missions. So together, all of these can provide a really quite significant body of material that you can peruse and study and get to grips with. Now, not all of these records will be available for all congregations, but this gives you an idea of the extent, the breadth of material that is potentially out there if you're looking for your ancestors through the records of a particular congregation. Now, where can you find Presbyterian records? Well, there are two principal repositories for them. The Presbyterian Historical Society Library, I'll talk about in a moment, and the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Titanic Quarter in Belfast. And PRONI has microfilm copies of a huge number of the records of individual congregations. Back, I think, in the early 1960s, maybe, PRONI began a very active campaign of actually going out and identifying Presbyterian records and microfilming them. And if you go to PRONI today, the main way you get access to their Presbyterian records, congregational records, is on microfilm. Now, PRONI also has original Presbyterian records. It has some copies as well as records for various other Presbyterian bodies and associations and so on. The main way to find out what PRONI does have, as far as Presbyterian congregations are concerned, is to look at the Guide to Church Records. This can be downloaded as a PDF from the PRONI website. If you simply Google Guide to Church Records, PRONI, the link will take you straight there. And if you download it as a PDF, it's organised by civil parish. Now, Presbyterian congregations, of course, are not organised by civil parish. But this is the way it's been organised. So essentially, the parish in which the Presbyterian meeting house is located is the way the Presbyterian records have been organised in the Guide to Church Records. It's not exclusively limited to Presbyterian records, of course, but it has information about the Church of Ireland records, or the Roman Catholic records, or the various other denominations, Methodists, Quakers, Moravians, and so on. But Presbyterian records are listed here in PRONI. So say if we go down the list here, and you can see Drumkeen, which is in the parish of Ahabog in County Monaghan. For Drumkeen Presbyterian Church, there are registers of baptisms, 1856 to 1981, and marriages, 1845 to 1956. And these are on microfilm in PRONI. Or if we come down here to under Adair Parish in County Down, Glasgow Presbyterian Church. In this case, baptisms back to 1780. That's very early. Marriages, 1781. There are also, you can see, communicants roll, 1890 to 1940. These are in PRONI 2. You can see they reference MIC, 1P. These are Presbyterian records on microfilm in PRONI. Now, you also see in these guided church records where it does indicate in many instances records in the Presbyterian Historical Society. Now, it's not comprehensive in terms of what's in the Presbyterian Historical Society, but certainly does provide useful guides to what you can find in the Presbyterian Historical Society. So, if we say take, if we say take the session minutes for Glasgow from 1760 to 1818. 1760 to 1818, and these are in the Presbyterian Historical Society. Now, to move on to the Presbyterian Historical Society, founded in the early part of the 20th century, in the first decade of the 20th century, and it's in the Assembly buildings in Belfast and Fisherwick Place, sometimes known as Church House. It's on the ground floor in Assembly buildings, and the library is open now. Of course, we're dealing in, and still we're just coming out of COVID, so better to just check the website to find out what are the opening hours at any particular time for the society. But the library of the society has an absolutely fantastic collection of records. It has duplicates of the microfilms held by PRONI. It also has a very large number of original records. Not simply, or rather, not limited to those listed in the Guide to Church Records produced by PRONI, but many others as well. So the website is worth checking out. Some of the information on it you can get access to for free, but anybody can use it. Other information is limited to members. So you can see, for instance, some of the things they have. You can access bulletins. That's the publication of the society. You can get access to articles from the bulletin. If you're a member of the Presbyterian Historical Society, you can get access to the history of congregations that I mentioned. If you're a member, you can get access to that. And there are various other things as well. So take time to browse the website, to peruse it. And I would certainly encourage you to consider joining the Presbyterian Historical Society. Now, in terms of the congregational records held by the Presbyterian Historical Society, if you're a member of the society, you can get access to listings of the records and what is available. So, if I just bring up one of the PDFs, you can download these as PDFs from the Presbyterian Historical Society website. And again, it lists what's in PRONI, which is great. But it also includes more information about records that are exclusively found in the library of the society. So to show you an example of that, well, the top image is from the PRONI Guide to Church Records, and this is for Auchnacloy Presbyterian Church in County Tyrone. And you can see where it has on microfilm in PRONI, you can get access to baptisms, 1812 to 27, and 1830 to 1977, and marriages, and committee minutes, 1825 to 70, session minutes, 1842 to 70. But in the Presbyterian Historical Society, if you come down to the bottom here, you can see where PHSI, the reference, and you can see account book back to 1743 to 82. With some committee minutes, subscription list for a new church, a seat list in 1760, stipend, those in arrears of stipend arranged by Townland. So there's something which is invaluable. If you're looking for your 18th century Presbyterian ancestors from Auchnacloy, that is something you must see. There's no doubt about it. You must have a look at that account book. And it's only available in the Presbyterian Historical Society. And it doesn't, for example, appear in the listing, in the PRONI listing, which is excellent. It's very, very good. But I'm just making the point that it doesn't include every single congregational record found in the library of the Presbyterian Historical Society. Now, there are other archives in Ireland where you can find Presbyterian records. Congregational records, for instance, can be found in the Louth County Archive Service for the Dundalk and Carlingford Presbyterian churches. You can some as well for Castlebellingham, Jonesborough and Omeath. That's just one example. You'll also find Presbyterian records in the likes of the National Library of Ireland in Dublin, in the Cork City and County Archive Service as well, and in many other places too. So increasingly, the County Archive Service across the Republic of Ireland have a very good web presence and catalogues you can access online. So worth checking out just to see, well, what do they have? Maybe, and you might not even expect this, but maybe they have records that would be of relevance to you in looking for your Presbyterian ancestors. And I'd also mention the Royal Irish Academy's Dublin Unitarian collection, a very large collection of records from different congregations in Dublin found now on deposit in the Royal Irish Academy. And it really is a huge collection of records, it must be said. And in general, for records of Presbyterian congregations in Dublin, have a look at Stephen Smurl's Dictionary of Dublin Dissent, because it provides a brief synopsis or account of each congregation, but also lists the records that are available and where they can be found. Okay, to look at some actual records. Now, I mentioned that funeral or burial records are not very common within congregational collections. This is a very interesting item. This is for the funeral register of First Presbyterian Church in Belfast, and it covers the period 1712 to 1736. And it's not so much a register of burials or even of funerals. Rather, it is a record of the hiring out of funeral gear. So the items you would need to have for a funeral, say a pall or mortcloth and other items like that. So it's a record of who was hiring out this funeral gear, for whom it was being hired out, and also the fees that were paid, and the date that this took place. And it's clear that many people from far beyond Belfast were coming to the First Presbyterian Church to acquire these items for a funeral. Now, session books within the Presbyterian Church can be extremely valuable. These include these are the meetings of the minister and the ruling elders, and the session sat in many ways as a court, dealt with a range of different issues. It dealt with errant members of the congregation who had stepped out of line in various ways, and how these cases were dealt with and the punishments that were handed down. It might even include lists of people in situations of need. So here, this is a page from the Ahadui session book held by the Presbyterian Historical Society. The session book covers the period 1702 to 1761. And in this instance, we're looking at a page of money that was distributed to the poor. So you can see the names of the poor and the amounts of money each was given. This is from 1713. So you can see different names: Janet Patterson, Elizabeth Merkel, the orphan. Or further down here, a stranger. Another, a stranger. So the people on this list are very, they're going to be the people that are hardest to trace in other sources. They're not necessarily going to have a headstone or have left a will or to be in possession of land as tenant farmers necessarily. They're people who, and very, very often, escape the written record. And yet here we can find them in the Ahadui session book from as far back as 1713. I mentioned a communicant list, and to show you an example of a page from a communicant list, this is for Cullybackey Reformed Presbyterian Church. And we have a listing of the members. We have a listing of, it includes their occupation even, when they were admitted to communion. And then there's a column for remarks or comments, observations on the right-hand side. And you see there, I've circled gone to America, gone to America, gone to America, for the Mann family. James, Elizabeth and Mary Mann, members of this congregation. We also have dates of death. And if, for instance, you're talking about somebody who died before the official registration of all deaths in 1864, well, this may be the only instance where you'll find an actual date of death, not like an approximate date, but an actual date of death. So again, if these records exist, and the point I'm making is, if these records exist, check them out. Don't restrict yourself simply to registers of baptisms and marriages. Look at all of the records that are available and make the most of them. In this case, we're looking at a slide of a list of members of the Reformed Presbyterian Church in Derry, which was later in Clarendon Street. It was originally in Fountain Street in Derry. And so it's a list of the members, and then observations. And again, includes things like dates of death, and some instances even gives causes of death, or if the person moved to another congregation. And if you go down, you can see like Glasgow is mentioned, Melbourne is mentioned. It might include dates of marriage. And so something like this is well worth perusing, just to see if you can pick up something about your ancestors and maybe what happened to them, when they died, when they emigrated, where they emigrated. Now, certificates of disjunction, or even transfer certificates, these were issued to Presbyterians who were preparing to emigrate to another part of the world. And the idea was the Presbyterian would come before their session, they would seek a testimonial, essentially, something that would testify to their good character, and then they would take that with them and they would present it to the congregation in wherever it might be. It could be within Ireland, it could be across the water in Scotland or England, it could be in North America, Australia, or wherever. John Lockington wrote a very interesting article on a transfer certificate associated with the Bryan family of Ballyrony, County Down. It actually dates from 1718, which must be one of the very earliest of these surviving example of a transfer certificate from 1718. And you can even see a reproduction of it. That was published in the bulletin of the Presbyterian Historical Society in 2019. So if you want to see an example of one of these and going to read about it and understand the context, then I would check out that article by John. Now, the records of individual ministers can also be extremely valuable and worth checking out. In many instances, there are biographies of ministers or autobiographies. They will feature prominently in congregational histories. Surviving diaries may exist, or journals kept by ministers. There may even be personal papers kept by ministers, maybe correspondence or sermon notes or other records. And the FASTI, I'll mention the FASTI in more detail in a moment, but check out what's available for Presbyterian ministers, the minister of the congregation your family belonged to, because they may have kept additional records that can illuminate the lives of the members of the church. The individual on the screen is the Reverend Charles Kirk Toland, who was the minister of Brady Reformed Presbyterian Church in the late 19th century. And certainly he is one of the most bearded individuals who ever served the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. So looking at diaries then of the Presbyterian ministers. Well, John Kennedy's diary is in the library of the Presbyterian Historical Society. There are hopes that it's going to be, it has been transcribed and hopefully it'll be published fairly soon. Kennedy's diary covers the early part of the 18th century. It's a period for which there are no congregational records in the form of baptisms and marriages. But his diary is exceptional for its detail. It really is an extraordinary record in terms of how it portrays the congregation and much about social life and much about Kennedy's ministry and so on. So just take one day, the 20th of January 1726. Kennedy, he visited Andrew and the widow Trimble. He married Dick Tinsley and Agnes Patton. He called with J.O. is maybe an abbreviation for John McGee, and he baptized William Campbell's child, all in one day. And look at the detail about the congregation found in that record. The Reverend Robert Magill was the minister of Antrim Presbyterian Church in the early 19th century. And he was a remarkable individual for creating and preserving records about the congregation. And one of the most amazing items held by the Presbyterian Historical Society is, you could say, a family record book compiled by Magill, in which he sketched out the families. He even drew little sketches of the individuals. He tried to link them together. He provided information about who they were, when they married, when they died, where they emigrated, where they're buried, and so on and so forth. It really is an incredible volume. And it exists for Antrim, the congregation, the Presbyterian congregation in Antrim. So if you have an ancestor from Antrim Presbyterian Church, again, this is something you must see in terms of your research. Now, I mentioned FASTI just in passing. FASTI is a term given to brief biographical sketches of Presbyterian ministers. And the Presbyterian FASTI, the FASTI published by the Presbyterian Historical Society, comes in various parts. The original section deals with from the early 1600s through to 1840. Then there are subsequent slimmer volumes for the FASTI going up to 1910. And you'll see it gives details of the name of the minister. Typically, you'll find, like, say, where they were born, when they were born, where they were educated, where they served as minister, maybe who they married, and when they died. So just enough information to at least pinpoint where a minister was from and where the minister served. And you can get access to some of this information through the website of the Presbyterian Historical Society, if you're a member. Now, in conclusion, two things I'll mention. My own book, Researching Presbyterian Ancestors in Ireland, I hope will be helpful to many of you in looking at your Presbyterian roots on this island. I discuss the origins of Irish Presbyterianism, the different forms or manifestations of Presbyterianism in Ireland. I look at the formation of congregations and how understanding more about that can help you in your research. I look at the different congregational histories, records of ministers, and places to research your Presbyterian ancestors. So if you feel that book would be of use to you, then it may be worth checking out. And then finally, I really would encourage you to consider joining the Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland. There are different ways of becoming a member. You can join online, for instance. It's the most straightforward way. There are different, you could say, tiers of membership. You can become an annual member or a life member, or you can become an associate member, which allows you access to the member-only content on the website of the Society. So certainly do consider becoming a member of the Society and support its very important work. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to conclude with a remark just to simply say, don't ever give up in tracing your Presbyterian ancestors. You never know what you'll find until you start looking. Make the most of the many records that are out there. Of course, there will be difficulties. Access to records, or rather survival of records, may not be comprehensive. There are gaps in the records. Congregational records don't necessarily go back as far as you would like. But still, check out what is there. Even if there are no baptisms or marriages, consider the possibility that there could be other records. A call to a minister listing the names of members. Financial records, a committee book, a session book. Don't give up. Keep going. You never know what you'll find. Thank you very much for listening.